All right. Welcome back to the last section of videos. Woohoo! Then you get to watch a movie. So, chapter 5, section 2, women make progress. So, women actually are a pretty big proponent for this reform, partially because they really will benefit from this reform. But in the early 1900s, women began to make one thing clear. They were tired of being forced to stay home, cook, clean, and take care of children. Women wanted to be a part of the workforce and gain a secondary education, meaning college. And with the expansion of careers in colleges, women are able to achieve this and become a part of the progressive movement. The biggest struggle was that if most women wanted to be in the workforce, it was often not the jobs anyone wanted. They were taken advantage of, and they were often forced to work longer hours, and they never really made the same. So in order to make the same wages, they would have to work longer hours to equal the same amount of as their male counterparts. So also women were expected to hand their money over to their husbands, fathers, or brothers. Imagine working all day to come home and your dad say, "Give me all your money. We got to put it you can't be trusted." So women realized that in order to remedy this situation, they needed leverage for politicians. They needed to be able to vote. I think people forget that women did not gain the right to vote until almost a little under, or a little over 100 years ago. A key goal of women reformers was to limit the number of work hours. They had succeeded in multiple states. The most famous court case that refers to this push is Mueller versus Oregon. Oregon's what we say here. Oregon is what everyone else says. The Supreme Court upheld the long work hours for women was unhealthy and harmed their families. Although it viewed it was at first a win, it just justified a reason to pay women less and not hire them at all. If I have two candidates, one man, one woman, the woman can only work 8 hours, but a man can work 12. I'm going to hire the man. There's no questions about it. I can get more work and productivity out of him than I can the female. And with the workforce changing, Florence Kelly's seen this and decides to form the Women's Trade Union League. Its goal was to improve the working conditions of female factory workers. One of the few groups that had working class and upper class working together, which is very, very, very uncommon, as they often do not see eye to eye at all. And they really are going to push for this idea of a federal minimum wage and an 8-hour workday. The idea of a federal minimum wage, maybe not now, but historically when it was founded, it was the idea of the minimum wage that someone could survive off of and live, to be able to afford rent, food, and utilities and still be able to live an okay life. Florence Kelly believed that women were hurt by the unfair prices of goods that they had to buy to run their homes. So in 1899, she helped form the National Consumers League, or the NCL. And basically what the NCL did was it just gave special labels to goods produced under fair, safe, and healthy working conditions. And this tool basically allowed for women to band together and boycott companies that had questionable business practices. So it finally gave them some form of leverage against um, the men in charge of businesses, politics, and money. All right, the temperance movement, not a very popular movement if I had to suggest it now. Looking back, the reason the women's this temperance movement comes around is it's to improve family life. And so what's happening really um is these laws are going to be made to benefit mothers and keep families safe. And one of the efforts of the temperance movement was led by the Women's Christian Temperance Unit, or the WCTU. And that's going to be them right here, okay? And this one too. That's their little logo. This is all the women, okay? So the WCTU promoted temperance, okay? So we don't really know what that means probably, but it basically just means not drinking alcohol. So the temperance movement was kind of popular until it became a thing, and then it became unpopular. So here's really why. So what was happening is men would work these 12-hour workdays. They'd be stressed, or they'd want some time by themselves before they'd go home to the family. So they would go to the pub with their buddies and they would spend their wages. Then they'd get drunk and go home. And then their family wouldn't get to see them because they were drunk and went to bed. And often, when men get very, very drunk at this time, it was common to abuse their wives. And it was not technically illegal, but it wasn't technically legal. It was just kind of like a thing. Um, and it wasn't really like talked about, it kind of just happened. So this movement really kind of gains that momentum because women are really like good at banding together. And in this particular instance, this was happening to a lot of wives. So this group kind of takes off. And they would do these sit-ins and make men super uncomfortable. They'd come in and sit in pubs and just stare at them, or they would boycott outside these pubs. Basically, anything they could do to make the environment no longer comfortable, so they'd stop going. So this movement finally gained some momentum during the Progressive Era, which led to the passage of the 18th Amendment. Okay, 18th Amendment just abolishes alcohol. You can't buy it anymore, and you can't drink it. You can't sell it. So the 18th Amendment outlaws the production, transportation, and sale of alcohol, but not consumption, I guess. Technically, it's a loophole. The problem is in order for you to drink it, you have to buy it. In order for you to buy it, someone has to transport it there. And in order for someone to transport it there, someone has to make it. So we see a lot of wild things begin. So bootleggers are going to come about in this time. We're going to see innovations of how to sneak around alcohol in the public eye without being caught. People are going to start making alcohol in their bathtub. Okay. What is this? Is it a video? Yeah, it's video. Okay. We got a lot of videos woven in here. Either way, whatever. So, obviously, you never thought you would see this, but this is a protest about not being able to buy beer. I think my dad would physically almost die if he couldn't buy it. So, this becomes an aspect of the 20s, which, in all honesty, is probably the reason the progressive movement is going to lose a lot of its power when we get into the mid to late 20s, is because this era is a result of it. And this is why prohibition gets passed. And so the progressive era is really going to lose a lot of momentum from some of these, but Margaret Sanger thought that life would improve if women had less babies. She is going to be one of the first people in the world to open a birth control clinic. And she was jailed for this because it was kind of taboo at this time. The idea is kind of, you made a baby every time, or if you didn't, then it wasn't God's will, and you can't do that. So federal judges decided women should be given information about family planning, which is not technically birth control. At this time, family planning is a lot about tracking cycles and stuff like that, which we're not going to get into. If you want to, you can ask one of the teachers about it, but I'm not getting into it. So in 1921, Sanger found that the founded the American Birth Control League to make this information easier to find. And she starts printing pamphlets and leaving them for women. And so looking back at our time as a modern society. So I can't go back super far, but we're going to look at 1936. Right here, this yellow line, that means 4 or more babies, okay? This green one is 2 children. This one is 3. This like flat line is no children, and this little lighter yellow line is 1. And if we see there's a peak here in 45, which makes sense if you don't know this, it's the baby boomer era. Basically, all the soldiers come home and they all accidentally make a bunch of babies. It's not accidental, but you get my point. So this is what this peak is, right? But we also see a steep decline here, right? And this is when birth control and the idea of family planning really hits like its peak. Not peak, but it starts to become a regular thing. We see a large decline of 5 or more babies. Now, obviously, we see a little bit of a upward trend here. This is from 2013, okay? But the one thing that we see rise that was kind of low is just 2 or 3 children. In fact, we even see kind of some changes in 1 to no children. But anyways, a familiar name, Ida B. Wells. We talked about her last time. Last chapter, I believe, in the social issues one based around race. Wells forms the National Association of Colored Women, the NACW. They were a group aimed at helping the less fortunate families, and with the money raised from the educated Black women, they were able to open a daycare to protect and educate Black children while their parents worked. So here's the thing. I told you this before, but there's still a lot of racism in the United States at this time. And although it's not quite as violent in the North as it is in the South, it is still very prevalent. And if you have a population that finds your child inferior, they're not likely to probably teach your children that well either. So, to protect them and properly educate them, Black women decided to create their own daycares and sometimes like kindergartens to help these children learn the right way and not be afraid of being attacked or maybe mistreated. And their parents got to go back to work, right? Awesome. One of the boldest goals of the entirety of the progressive women movement was suffrage, the right to vote. Women didn't have the right to vote, and all they wanted to do was just to have a voice. They're citizens. They are affected by these policies and all of these things. And so they argued that there was only one way to make sure the government would protect children, foster education, and support life. Women were the sole providers in these parts of this in this realm of the world. Okay? Men didn't really take care of children. They didn't really worry about education, and they really didn't support family life. Those were all women's jobs. So how's the government going to speak on things that really aren't their aspects of life, especially when it's all men? So women wanted the right to be able to vote on things that mattered. So in 1890s, the national suffrage movement was re-energized by Carrie Chapman Catt. And her ability to captivate audiences encouraged women to join the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NAWSA. Okay. It is actually one of the more popular associations and does gain a lot of supporters. In 1900, Catt became the president of NAWSA and created the Winning Plan, which involved looking for support on two fronts. Okay. You got to look at Congress. You got to lobby for support. You can't do anything without the support of some of your congressmen and women. Just congressmen. There's no women yet. Okay. And using the referendum process to try and pass state suffrage. Okay. So the referendum, if we remember, is the ability to basically get signatures to get something on a ballot. And this works in Michigan, New York, and Oklahoma. Catt realized that she also needed public support and began her society plan. You cannot get votes and signatures if people don't support your ideas. So this plan recruited wealthy, well-educated women to gain the support of the upper class society. Okay? Poor women are not going to get the support of rich men, but well-educated rich women can get the support of rich men. So this produced the National Association opposed to women's suffrage, which you never thought would be a thing, right? Who would oppose women's suffrage? So here are some of the reasons. Because 90% of women either do not want it or do not care. They don't want the right to vote. Because it means competition of women with men instead of cooperation. Because 85% of the women eligible to vote are married and can only double or annul their husband's votes. Because it can be of no benefit rate with additional expenses involved. I don't know what that word is. It's still a little hard to read. These pamphlets are really kind of crappy to read. Because in some states, more voting women than voting men will place the government under petticoat rule. And because it is unwise to risk the good we already have for the evil of which may occur. So petticoat rule just means that there are more men than women, which means we are more likely to vote specific ways together, which means in theory women would determine the laws and certain legislative things that we talk about in specific areas, which for some odd reason these women did not like that. Okay. It's meant to strike a little bit of fear on some of the aspects of why voting is not great. Obviously, that doesn't always take up well with women. I disagree on the 90%, but it's okay. 86% of all statistics are made up, right? Some women thought a more daring strategy was necessary, and Alice Paul, a Quaker with a formal education, began unionizing women across the country. She creates the National Women's Party, or the NWP. Got it. They were the first to perform protest marches. This is something new. No one had really done that. Nobody had thought to walk around with a picket sign and say, "We want the right to vote. Votes for women. Women use your vote." Okay? Nobody thought of that. Nobody thought of this tactic, and Alice Paul was the first to coin it. The NWP believed in more of the showy tactics, whereas Nassau believed in more of the lobbying mentality. So NWP is going to get a lot more public visuals and press, whereas the Nassau is going to see a lot more quiet movements with, the bureaucracy and a lot of behind the scenes work. Despite all of that, after World War I, women are granted the right to vote in June of 1919, the 19th Amendment. And that's it, y'all. That's it. We're done.